Hey guys, welcome back to Understanding Anxiety with Trace. So we're now entering the third phase of the course, and this is communication. Um, this is really the turning point for working with the anxiety. Um, so in the last two phases, first one was groundwork. We laid some concepts down for you guys to try and get you some better understanding of what's going on. Then we talked about the filling the holes in the bucket concept and some practical ways that you can do that, as well as some more concepts that interplay with it. So hopefully you're at a point where you have applied these concepts, you've made some changes, and you feel that space. You feel the relief from those changes, and you've got more vitality. You've learned how to change your state, and you feel more open to it. You feel like you have a little bit more of a chance to work with it, and you're not necessarily helpless to it. And those are important things that we have to have laid out before we can work on this next concept, which is communication. Um, so ideally, what we're trying to do here is just open the lines. We want to be able to communicate with and talk to not only ourselves, but with the anxiety. And hopefully in the last few videos, we've learned how to communicate with ourselves, how to find out what's going on, to inquire within. And so now, instead of we're taking those practices that we've applied and we're turning them towards the anxiety. It's like, okay, I've worked on this with myself as much as I can. It's time to talk to you about it. Um, so this is kind of one of those things where it's a little bit difficult to conceive of when you're first dealing with the anxiety. We don't want to talk to it. We don't want to. Why would I want to talk to it? It's yelling at me. And that's kind of what anxiety is, right? It's a scream. It's yelling at you. Um, so the first question I want to pose is, what is the anxiety saying? Past the screaming, what is it actually saying to you? And we talked a little bit this in the groundwork videos. It's saying that this is a problem. It sees this as a threat. It wants you to focus on this. And while initially it's hard to respond to that appropriately while it's screaming at you, hopefully with the last few videos that we've made, where we talked about building up that vitality, we're hoping that you can get that extra bit of energy that you need in order to just, okay, you're screaming at me, but I want to hear what you have to say. I want to listen. I want to try and work with you on this. And we're going to need that opportunity mindset to do that. We're going to need to be able to change our state in order to do that. We need to make sure that we have our needs met well enough to do that. So all of the things that we previously talked about are all the foundation for the next part. And you'll see that as we continue to go through these videos, each part is kind of the foundation for the next step. So when I say to use the extra energy, what I'm talking about is, of course, if we go back to that cycle of anxiety where we're talking about, you have a part where you're at a low anxiety level, but you kind of got a high energy level, right? And the processes that we've been using so far is to try and expand that. We're trying to get a little bit more vitality. We're changing our patterns a little. We're trying to get more time in that phase of the anxiety. We're trying to change our state when we get to a higher anxiety level so that we can still retain some of that energy, right? And what I'm ultimately getting at is if we're able to use that energy to maintain the mental fortitude, to maintain the emotional fortitude, that when we're experiencing a trigger and the anxiety is yelling at us, that we're able to just kind of, okay, I can just sit here for just a little bit, even if it's just a slight change. Okay, I'm not reacting as much right now. I'm just going to listen for a little bit. What is it saying? What is it yelling at me about? Um, so that's the first goal, is what is being said. And when you're actually able to listen to it, even for just a little bit, you'll start to get some more insight as far as what's going on with your personal flavor of anxiety. You'll start to say, okay, it's saying this, and I can relate that back to my needs worksheet. I can relate that back to my triggers worksheet. And I can see how what it's saying is lining up with the introspection that I've done. Or maybe it's like, well, my introspection is a little off. It looks like it's going to be more like this. And so now we're starting to work with the anxiety. We're just listening at this point, The next concept of this is actually going to be to catalyze your emotions. And this requires some of that emotional and mental fortitude and that extra energy. But what I mean by this is that there's typically a few responses to, feeling anxious or having a panic attack. I know for myself, I put down my 3 most common emotional reactions to a trigger or even a panic attack, and that is anger, apathy, and frustration. So anger is like, man, are you serious? Why are you doing this again? Come on, anxiety. I've been making all this work. I've been putting in a lot of effort. I'm mad at you because you're yelling at me and I'm trying to help. And a lot of social stigmas would say that, like, this is not how you want to talk to somebody, or that's not how you want to deal with a part of yourself. But actually what we can do is we can catalyze that emotion. As long as we have the emotional fortitude to do so, because we don't want to yell back at the anxiety. That, it's not going to hear us. It's yelling. It's not going to hear us, right? So we want to take that anger and say, you know what? I'm trying to help you out, anxiety, but I'm angry at you. Just be straightforward and honest. You need that honesty and that vulnerability that you've been working with on yourself. You have to show it to the anxiety as well. So, I'm angry at you because I want to help. I want to try and work with you on this. I'm trying to open up this line of communication, but you're just yelling at me. I can't help you if you're just yelling at me. And so we take that anger, we've catalyzed it to an opportunity to communicate, right? Same thing with apathy. That's a very common response for me. It's like, whatever, here we go again. And even if that is your response, you can present that to the anxiety. It's like, it's whatever, man. You're just going to yell at me, so, okay, just yell. And that can actually give us some space. It's like, if you, I'll give you an example on a real world level. For those of you who have kids or have seen a kid, if a kid starts throwing a fit and the parent just kind of ignores it, well, what happens, right? Depending on their parenting style, eventually the kid's just going to kind of give up on throwing a fit, right? There's no point in throwing a fit if they're not getting the reaction, because there's a reason they're throwing a fit. They want something, they're scared of something, they're hurt, they're hungry, whatever it is, right? But if they're not getting the response that they're expecting, they'll stop throwing a fit. And the same thing applies to anxiety. Now, I'm not here to say that your anxiety is a child or that you should treat it as incompetent or any negative way. But my point is that if we have that apathetic attitude and we're saying, you know what, I don't care right now, and I'm just, whatever, then you're actually letting the anxiety know that you're not going to really respond to its screaming. Of course, this isn't, it's not a switch. Again, guys, it's going to take time to kind of work on this stuff. But this is something that you can focus on to change that apathy to an opportunity as well. The same thing applies with frustration, or I may would put like depression here. And my point is with that is that we can get frustrated that we're not making any progress. We can get frustrated that we're having a hard time communicating with it. We can get depressed in the sense that, it's just, I'm not making any progress. I'm not getting where I can't communicate with it. It's just yelling at me and I can't do anything. And that's a very viable response. That one's a little bit trickier to catalyze. Ideally, because depression is kind of like a low energy state, ideally we would kind of move that up towards frustration or anger in the sense that, why am I being depressed? This is ridiculous. And so, but the goal is to try and to catalyze that back again, saying, if I'm just going to be sad about it, that's fine. Tell the anxiety, like, this is making me really depressed and I don't want to work with you right now. I don't want to deal with you right now. I'm not saying I don't ever want to deal with you, and this is important for the language. I'm not saying I don't want to work with you. I'm not saying that I don't ever want to listen to you. But right now, you're depressing me. I'm very sad because you're still yelling at me, or you're not helping me open this line of communication. And ultimately what this is all boiling down to is we're trying to get you to be honest and vulnerable with your anxiety. Because that's how you open the lines of communication. Because in a sense, if we go back to our groundwork, the anxiety feels neglected. It feels that it hasn't been heard. And that's why it's yelling at you, because you haven't listened to it. Um, we'll go back to the example of the child. You know, if a kid has something they want to show you, and they start tugging on your shirt or tapping you or whatever, and you're ignoring them, they're gonna keep tapping, and eventually they'll hit you maybe, or eventually they'll start to cry or whatever. They may or may not escalate it. But in a sense, that's exactly what's happened with the anxiety in the first place. So at this point, we're kind of turning the tables back on the anxiety in the sense that, all right, we're here to listen, we're here to help, and if it's continuing to throw a fit, I can't help you, I can't talk to you. You wanted to talk, let's talk, but not yell. So this actually is kind of, it's like putting a mirror in front of the anxiety. You're showing it what its actions are having an effect on, right? You're saying, okay, look, let's work on this, but you can't yell at me. That doesn't help anybody. That doesn't help me listen to you. That doesn't help me help you. And so when you start to have these discussions with your anxiety, when you start to talk to it, it actually is like I'm sure there's some psychology behind it, but it's actually showing a mirror to it, saying, hey, okay, well, you're right, I guess this yelling's not working. And that's not to say that, again, it's not a switch. It's still going to yell sometimes, but you'll probably notice that it'll be a little bit less severe and maybe less often. And ideally, you want to get to the point where we can start to communicate with the anxiety when we're not triggered, when we're not in the middle of a panic attack, because that's where we're actually be able to make some more changes to our patterns, to our state of being, that type of thing. So that's kind of what I have for this segment. Like I said, this is just, we're opening the lines of communication. If you guys have any questions, if you want any specific examples that'll work for you, again, you can always send me a private message. In any case, I will see you guys next time.